Hey, good evening, everybody. I hope everybody's having a good day. Welcome to Roll the Dice with Dave. Um, I just have a big smile on my face because I was just looking at what's going on in the northeastern part of the United States with all the snow, and I'm glad I am not living in the northeastern part of the United States anymore, and that I'm down here in Florida, and all we're dealing with is 55-degree weather versus feet of snow. But to all my northeasterners, I hope you guys are safe. I hope you get through this weather soon. But at the same time, I am so glad uh, as a Puerto Rican man and of the tropical people that I am actually down here in Florida. So I just want to say that. Welcome to Roll the Dice with Dave. I'm really excited. Today was Groundhog Day. I don't know if Puxatawny Phil actually saw his shadow or not. So I don't know if we're in store for 6 more weeks of winter. But if it's a Florida winter, I'm okay with it. So I don't mind that. So I hope everybody had a good Groundhog's Day. And I also want to welcome everybody to Black History Month. This has always been one of my favorite times of year, going into Black History Month. I just love all the things that take place. We have a lot of stuff going on at Flagler College, so I'm really excited about that. Before we get started tonight, I do have a favor, like I've been asking everybody the last few weeks. If you are watching, if you can go ahead and hit that like button. And after you go ahead and hit that like button, if you can go ahead and do me a favor and go ahead and share it on your timeline on Facebook. Let people know we're having a great discussion today on Black History Month. And is it still important? Is it still a good thing? What are some of the issues that come up with Black History Month? So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Also, if any of you are checking me out on YouTube, if you can go ahead and subscribe to Roll the Dice with Dave. If you're on Facebook, go ahead and go to Roll the Dice with Dave, my fan page, and go ahead and follow. I would really appreciate that, and this will keep you up to date on all the things going on with my channel. So moving into today's show, I'm really excited to have this individual back on. Again, a good old friend, and we've been chopping it up over the last, I'd say, few weeks. Since we reconnected on a deeper level. And today I just want to go ahead and bring out my man, Chef Boy RP, Ronnie Parker. Ronnie, do you mind just introducing yourself again?
Yeah, absolutely. Back like I left something. Ronnie Parker. I am the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the Hampton Roads Chamber, the largest chamber of commerce in the Commonwealth of Virginia. D-Rib, happy to be back.
I tell you what, I'm really excited because you touched on a key piece right there, and we're going to talk a lot about some of the things that you and I have just been talking about, especially from the standpoint of Virginia, right? So we'll get into those conversations a little bit more. But thank you again for being on the show. It really is an honor to have you on because, one, we go way back, right? So we went from teacher-student to, I would say, a friendship. And now in this stage, you are becoming the teacher, and I'm learning a lot from you and what you do in your position. So thank you for joining me on the show. I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely, brother.
So moving into the first piece, I want to go ahead and get into the review. So the first thing I want to ask you regarding Black History Month is, what is the most significant moment for you with regard to Black history?
Yeah. So for me, I'm going to have to go back, but not, more so because of just my personal history, but also what I do for a living as an inclusion officer. I mean, the Million Man March, Martin Luther King Jr., everybody, is probably for me the most significant part of Black history. It showed that, I think you and I have talked about it a little bit. I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but Black history as American history, people from all over fighting for rights, fighting for truth, fighting to be seen as a person, seen as a people. And I think that when you get that collaboration together, people working together for an extreme initiative and effort to drive the nation forward, I don't know if you can find anything more powerful than that.
Yeah, and that is such a significant moment. I was just talking about this with a couple of colleagues, and everybody was giving their different takes on the most significant. And for me, it ties into my love of baseball. So for me, it was, Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier. Yeah. And it's funny because the conversation came up and they said, why is that so important to you? And I said, if not for Jackie, my man, really one of the biggest heroes in Puerto Rico, Roberto Clemente, may not have a chance to actually cross that barrier and get a chance to be in Major League Baseball. So what Jackie did, he didn't just do for Black athletes or Black people in general. He did it for more people than I think maybe many realize. And it gave an individual such as myself the opportunity to play baseball and have the dream of being a Major League Baseball player. Now, it didn't come to fruition, but I was still able to have that dream because when I looked, I said, hey, there's somebody like me who's playing baseball. And when I was in high school, one of my most defining moments that I'll never forget, I actually got to play Jackie Robinson in a school play, which I thought was, yeah. So, I went to Manhattan Center High School. There were so many amazing, talented young men and women of color, specifically Black young men and Black young women. And then of all the student body, they said, hey, Dave, do you mind playing Jackie Robinson? And I was just like, hell yeah, I'll play Jackie Robinson, right? To be a baseball player and a man of color, what an honor to be asked to play such an iconic individual. So that was big for me.
That's awesome, man.
Sticking to the review, I want to get your take on some shows. I watch these shows all the time, and they always seem to get a little bit more prominence around Black History Month. But what are your thoughts on shows that try to portray the Black experience?
Yeah, that's so there's so many now, right? I mean, and they vary. You get the reenacting shows of what really happened with the Central Park. You get those we get that reenactment. That's horrifying. People realize that, wow. And then you get shows like Blackish that just kind of say, hey, this is the average Black family. It's not what you might see in the media. We live just like everybody else. So they vary so much, and it's what are the opinions on them? I'd like to talk with somebody from Nielsen or something that has reviews on them, because I'd like to see how they're viewed, because it's always been there. And the Black perspective, it's nice to see it on television, and it's nice to see it portrayed on TV. Is it always right? No, but I don't know why you say it's always wrong, because there we go. I think we're talking about it at some point. I know you and I have talked about it. The monolithic piece, we're not all the same. So I appreciate it. It shows so many different variances of the Black culture. So I'm all for it. Keep pushing for it, and I'm going to keep watching.
My kids are mixed, right? I'm Puerto Rican, my wife is white, so my kids are mixed. But some of our favorite shows are rooted in the Black experience, and two in particular that we have sat down and watched over and over. And the crazy part is, and I say this with all respect to my kids, they laugh at it because it is comedy, but for some of it, the experiences, they're laughing at the experiences because of how they're portrayed in comedy. For me, I'm laughing almost like, oh, because otherwise I may cry, because I've experienced that as a person of color. So the two shows, Blackish is a must. We watch that all the time. We watch reruns. We check it out. And then on the Netflix, Black AF, right? So we started watching that one. And it was such a, I want to say, a little bit more refreshing and a little in your face a little bit more, which is probably why it was on Netflix and just not on regular TV. So I think that was for us a big thing. And, poo on me for this, because I want to say as a result of that show, my kids, I think, got a little bit better understanding of the significance of Juneteenth to so many Black individuals for the Black AF. Because even though I talked about it, I'm the faculty advisor for the Black Student Union. There were just so many things that I think were missed over the years that came up. I actually want to put this, it's a pretty big comment, and this is actually somebody I work with, and I thought this was pretty interesting. Given the topics to be discussed, just curious our thoughts on all the various Smithsonian institutions, such as the Native American History Museum, most recently the National African American History Museum. Do we think they should all be combined so that it's American history? That's a good question. Ronnie, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think there should be a combination? And also a little follow-up there. I've recently heard there's movement towards a woman's American History Museum too. And you're welcome, Tanya. Thank you for supporting the show tonight. So what are your thoughts? Do you think those should be combined, or let's keep those things separate?
No, Tanya, that's a good question. And that's something I talk about every day. We want to be celebrated. I'm talking about people in general, celebrate that culture. It's okay to say, hey, this is Black history. Hey, this is Native history. But all in the same time, it's American history. And I think that you and I have talked about this. It's just to the point where Black history, we're talking Black history, talking Native history. it's what we progressed from. This is the progression of America. So absolutely, why not celebrate them together? But don't put women's history, Native history, Black history, any marginalized or disenfranchised group. Don't just put them together. Put white history as well. All of it's got to go together in one if we're going to talk about where we came from as America to where we are now. That's the progression of America, whether it's ugly, whether it's hurtful. That's the truth of who we are. So absolutely, if we're going to have these museums, it's okay to continue to say, we want to celebrate this in a silo so that we don't wash away who we are. But at the same time, we have to understand that it's a progression of American history. So I'd be all for celebrating them in one with an understanding that we're not going to put it to the side who we are as a people, as a respect to our own culture and our culture making up what America is. So that's a really good question.
It is. And it's one of those tough questions, and it brings up, why is there Black History Month, right? Why is there Latino History Month? So all of, the Latino heritage, it's because, so many people have been marginalized for so long that there is some recognition that should go there. But at the end of the day, when you look at what Jackie Robinson did, and I'm going to stick with Jackie Robinson because I use that as my defining iconic point. That's history, right? That is history. I don't define it. I think that's probably one of my just favorite points in history, period. But because we are in Black History Month, I said, that is such a defining moment. But it's so tough. And I think it's even more difficult now, kind of getting to what Tanya asked, because people, I think, have gotten so worried about the recognition maybe somebody else is getting that they feel is unfair. And at the end of the day, I don't believe in trying to blow out somebody else's candle to make mine shine brighter. It's Black History Month. That candle is shining bright. Hey, let's celebrate it. Let's lift it up. Let's go ahead and let it shine, because there's so many other moments in time where other cultures are given an opportunity to shine, right? So, Tanya, that's a great question, and Ronnie, that was a really good answer, man. I tell you what,
no, man. I was gonna say, Tanya, what I'd like to see. Let's go ahead and push this initiative. Let's get a museum, a history museum, wherever, how many we need, and put the history together and show how they affected one another, how women's history, how Black history affected each other as far as the movement and progression forward. I'd advocate for that museum.
I like that, man. So I want to move into the HTM highlights, and this is something that there's a long history here with the question I'm going to ask you, and it's starting to resurface in some of the literature, and I think it's going to continue to stay surface for a while. But do you think there's going to be? Do you think there's a need for maybe an updated Green Book? And also, do you mind explaining what a Green Book is, just in case anybody happens to tune in and is not completely versed in what a Green Book actually is?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. Was the name of the movie Green Book? Was that?
I think it was Green Book. Yeah.
So for those that don't know, a Green Book was somewhere that had like safe places for African Americans to stop on their travels. You could stop here, you could go here, you could dine here, you could stay at this hotel. So there are places that say, hey, if you go here, you're okay, you're safe. Anything that's not in the Green Book, we can't say you're going to be safe. We can't say you're welcome here. So to say, hey, should we have a Green Book in 2021? That's a tough conversation. For me, the answer would be, how does that help us as Americans? How does it, are we saying that, hey, we have issues where people are not safe or people aren't welcome here, so let's locate locations for them to travel and stop to that are safe zones? How do we make that work in 2021? Because for me, it's a step backwards. I think if anything, the Green Book should be, hey, everywhere, we're all going to go here. This is for everybody. Let's all stop at all these places. So I don't know how it progresses us if we bring up Green Book now and say, hey, you can go to these places and you'll be safe. I don't know what kind of message that spreads.
So I agree with you there. Does it kind of move things backwards? I want to touch on this real quick before we continue this Green Book conversation. My brother Jamie Jenkins actually threw out a comment. He said, Ronnie, I respect your opinion. However, we cannot ignore the fact that for several hundred of years, Black Americans were just not celebrated, and that is such a true, valid point.
True.
And my brother, we don't even have to go back hundreds of years, right?
Yeah.
We can just go back sometimes just a few years, and you'll find where Black Americans are just not celebrated, and sometimes achieving certain levels of accomplishment are actually torn down or vilified. Try to be torn down instead of lifted up as heroes. And to this extent, I want to throw this out there, and I'm not trying to bring any shade to this individual because I think it's great. Kamala Harris. So she's going through this process. Now she's the vice president of the United States. And then so many people are going, oh, that's awesome. But let's look at what she did when she was the attorney general out in California, right? And almost like trying to tear down somebody who's reached a certain level of heroic status. And we have a lot of that too. So I think my brother brings up a good point. Jamie, thank you for that point.
Jamie, that's a good point. And if we're talking, so we're talking about going back, what is it? Carter Woodson, right? Black History, was it a Negro History Week, right? Was a deciding factor to say, hey, we're going to have a week of celebration for African Americans because there's so many things that we did historically that were not celebrated. Then, Gerald Ford said, hey, we're going to make this, a month. I'm president. We're going to make this a month of celebrating Black history and Black people. So Black history should continue to be celebrated. It can continue to move forward and continue to tell the story of where we've come and where our progressions come from. For my opinion, I'm not sure if it does justice being just a Black History Month. Why is it held to a month? Why are we, I don't know who marketed that in the beginning. I mean, there was progression, obviously, from a week to a month. But I would say, not to make it comical or anything, whoever marketed Christopher Columbus discovering America and ran with that, they were geniuses. That worked, right? Didn't happen. So somehow we've got to switch the marketing on Black history, and it's got to move out of this month thing to your American history. The story's got to be told throughout the year. So let's continue the celebration. Let's continue to push forward. But I would like to see it move out of just a month into the school books that we're learning about constantly, into those leaders and heroes. So that's just my opinion.
So I appreciate that. And I love how you mentioned school books because my mom is chiming in. How can we accomplish this if you have one set of history that's being taught one way and then there's another set in the history books? I tell you, with all these different comments, we may not even get to everything that we were going to talk about, bro. I'll tell you what.
Let's go. Q&A.
Right. So one big piece here that I want to bring up with this and just to get your thoughts on it is when people talk to me about Abraham Lincoln, I'm like, what he did was cool, but he wasn't necessarily the coolest dude on the block when it came to it. And they go, what do you mean? And I said, even though he fought for the abolition of slavery, he did not believe blacks were equal to whites, both politically or socially. Let's not get it twisted. He actually thought after freeing the slaves, he wanted to put them on boats and send them to Africa and Central America. He did not want to keep them here in the United States. He said, hey, I don't think anybody should be a slave, but they're not on my level. As a matter of fact, they're not on whites' level. So that's a different aspect there from the history book. So what are your thoughts on how we should maybe progress forward when it comes to the history books and what is actually being taught?
Yeah, I think it's gotta, and I think I've got a book somewhere over here. I think I talked about Howard Zinn before, and I've got it here. But it's A People's History of the United States. And it's an important book written by a white male, and it tells the perspective of history from the people that were not, the colonizers. It tells the perspective of the natives, of the slaves, and how things were saw in their eyes. So, it's not untrue to know that history goes to those that are victorious. So how are we really telling history? How are we defining? How did Christopher Columbus become the mainstay point for discovering America? So it's really come down to education. And I think it does start with grade school, how we're teaching our kids. And that's the point that goes back to the mixing Black history in with everything. It's all got to be mixed in with one. When you're teaching the story about history, you're telling the story about the progress of America. You go to these school books and you look at Black history, you look at white history, you look at Hispanic history, you look at Latinx community, all together and tell the story piece by piece. Back to that museum, Tanya, and let's see how we progress together. So I think it's got to be, not to say we've been miseducated, but there's got to be something with our education system where we take a look back at that history and see how we can tell the story a little bit more clear.
Cool. Thank you so much for that. I want to throw this up. This is actually one of my students at Flagler College. Allie, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you. I think schools, all of America, should teach their students, especially white students, should have a clear understanding of what happens in the communities around them, especially in the African-American communities. And that the reason I wanted to bring this up is because that leads so well into my man, Luis Rivera, who talks about the best way to celebrate all history is to report it truthfully and accurately. I had this conversation with a colleague, and I said, we're not trying to erase history. We're just trying to make sure it's reported correctly. You know what I mean? We're trying to erase inaccuracies. And he kind of stopped and goes, "Oh, I never really thought about it that way." And some people don't. They really don't think about it that way. Your thoughts on maybe a little bit more truthfulness in school? Also, before we get there, my cousin throw out, she said that's an amazing book. Also has a website. And I'm going to throw the website out there, and everybody can go out there and check it out. So, Ronnie, your thoughts on accurate reporting and representation of our history?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a show. It's not for the kids, but it's called American Gods. And there's a character. I just wrote an op-ed. There's a character called Mr. Ibis, I think. And,
I knew you were going to say that, bro. That show is actually legit. I haven't watched a lot of it, but I've watched enough. That show's legit. Great show.
Yeah, it's good too, and it has some really good points that are just kind of, I told him, like golden nuggets that you can take away. And he makes some kind of remark to the point of, if you're constantly being told that you're less than or you're not equal to, you start to live in that truth instead of what might be truth or might be factual. So if we're not historically accurate about history or how things happened, there's always going to be that level of you're not on the same level of me, or I'm not on the same level as you. And that's where our disagreements come in. And it's in the history books. If people that look a certain way didn't do anything to progress and move America forward, then what are we saying the value of that? People that look like that, what's their value here? That if there are people that look one other way, and we're saying that they did everything to progress, to move America forward, that's why you see all the statues up that look like certain people, then it just puts people on different levels. So I think that if we're going to work and find some equilibrium here, there's got to be a telling of what everyone did to make America what it is, make America this united nation. So I absolutely believe that we've got to go and look at history. We've got to look at how it was told and who was telling the story, who was allowed to write then, who was keeping the penmanship for these books that tell our story, what their mindset was, because clearly we weren't the people we are, back then today, and how they told the story, and see what people were disenfranchised in those groups. And let's look at maybe telling the story a little bit differently.
I like it. I like it very much. Just a couple of quick comments. So Allie's talking about, there is a lot of negativity that goes around in the discussion of Black communities. We see it here. It's referred to as West Augustine. And it's talked about in such a bad way, but I've actually made a prediction. I said, West Augustine right now is considered, that bad area. It's where most of the Black community lives here in St. Augustine area. But I said within the next few years, it's going to be one of the most desired real estate areas because people are going to go in, buy the land cheap. It's going to be like, the stealing of the land, right? The gentrification kind of pushing everybody out. And next thing you know, there's going to be $500,000 homes in that area because it's not going to be too far from the water. It's going to be able to be built up and purchased cheap, built cheap, and then it's going to be very, very expensive. So thank you so much for that comment, Allie. And my sister talks about the celebration, bringing it to attention even louder. Thank you so much for that, Sin. I love you so much. Appreciate your thoughts on it. And this goes to show how passionate people get when it comes to this conversation. And the fact that you and I sat and talked and we went, hey, we need to have this conversation to kick off Black History Month. That shows how important it is. We do have a question from my brother. It says, Ronnie, are you for or against reparations? If so, what would it look like? If not, why not? That's a great question. That is a really good question. So your thoughts on that, Ronnie?
If we're talking about putting checks and dollars into the hands of African Americans to do whatever with, not sure I go for that. I would like to see it put towards um, housing, to development, to land ownership, because of the value. And this just goes back to the education system that's known to be tied in with communities of color, because of what communities of color are taught sometimes in school, that they don't have the greatest books. And this, even if we're not talking communities of color, right? We're talking about impoverished communities. They don't sometimes have the upgraded school books. They're not taught about, development, financing, land, and all the things you can do with ownership. So for me, if we're talking about reparations, as far as saying, hey, here's $1 million, go do what you want to with it, I don't think that helps the progression of Black people. I think what we do is say, hey, if you're talking about reparations, we're talking land. Now we're talking ownership. Now we're talking of maybe classes and colleges that'll help you learn to own your own business, help you with grants for those businesses, and help you progress into ownership. I think that's where the level comes in, where we're talking about now we're getting some equilibrium. We're talking about having things, ownership. And that's what reparations would look like to me if we were to say tomorrow, we're going to give reparations. But I'm absolutely against just throwing money out there, because I'm worried that a lot of the impoverished communities aren't ready to handle that amount of money. And I don't think it would be fair to them, because it would just be thrown back into the people's hands that gave it to them. So no, I'm not for monetary reparations.
And it's funny you mentioned that, like just throwing it back. I don't know if you ever saw that skit Dave Chappelle did, where they gave the reparation checks, and you ever see, you know what I mean? So he's making light of it, but at the same time, he's like, hey, potentially this is the ramifications if we do this kind of reparations. My dad always said the most truthful people are the comedians, right? Because everybody's sitting there laughing, but they're so honest. And Dave Chappelle, you also look at Trevor Noah, you look at all these guys that do comedy, and we're sitting there laughing, but there's so much truth rooted in that comedy. And they could be the most honest people on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's something when you think about it from that standpoint.
It absolutely is. It's just and there's a reason why there's the NFL is 70% African American, I believe, 75 maybe. And there's a reason now why these young athletes are having to take these courses, financial ownership, and all these things. It's because the skits, like we saw with Dave Chappelle, they happen to oftentimes be realistic. It's you make light of these things, but that's another reason to talk about monetary, because you're throwing all this money. What are people to do with it? So let's give them that education that they need to do the right things with it and help grow.
Cool. So thank you so much for all your thoughts and answering those questions. I want to shift to our third little topic, which was the in your opinion. And the question was, do you think most people default to the thought of Black History Month being associated with slavery? There were 69% of the respondents from the online polls said no, 31% said yes. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think if you're saying no, then I want to know what you're thinking about, because it's what people go to. We go to MLK Jr. We go to how Black people came from slavery, and we're still struggling, and we're still trying to progress. We often tend to start Black history with turbulence, negative energy, and when it was started to highlight the successes of what Black people were, with the contributions that Black people are giving to America. But we tend to default to slavery, even though I know that the poll says we don't. I could probably say we might have a little bit of skewed numbers, and I'd ask them, what do you default to when you're talking about Black history? Because with minority cultures, most of the time we talk about, the natives and what happened with natives and the Pilgrims coming over. We go to the negative aspects of history. And when we're talking Eurocentric culture, that's not really what we go to. We don't go through that. We don't talk about the Boston Tea Party and people coming over to America to do things. We go to the highlights. We get Christopher Columbus, the Savior, and things like this. So we tend to, even if we're not talking solely about slavery, we tend to default to the negative aspects of whatever minority group we're talking about when we talk about that history. So for me, it's let's find a way to spin it to focusing on the positive while not forgetting where we came from.
And I think when I looked at this, I felt like it was depending on who was asked, the pockets. So there's some people that I know, um, the default, like for me, the default is not to think about all the negativity from a Black History Month standpoint. I don't forget the negatives that happen or all the trials and tribulations, but for me, I like to focus on, hey, let's look at where we're at, where we're going, the pushing forward. But there, for some people, I feel that is the default. The default is, oh, okay, let's just focus on the slavery piece, and then we'll go from there. Um, do I think each side is necessarily wrong? No, but I think it just depends on who you are and the way you approach things. Maybe drove some people to start from certain places. I felt that was a tough question for some people to probably answer. And I had some interesting Facebook conversations last night. Some people just sending me some DMs, and a couple said, I can't believe people are saying that, no, people don't default there, because I've experienced the default. I've seen people just jump right to it. So when we were talking about, hey, let's go ahead and get this conversation going, I was like, you know what, let me throw this out there and just kind of see where people are coming from. Almost 70% said, no, I don't think that's the starting place for most people. I actually disagree. I think that is a starting place for a lot of people when it comes to Black History Month. And I think there's a lot of people, too, that if you ask them, if they spoke honestly, would prefer that there just isn't a Black History Month. They would just rather just see it not exist. So we have, that is true. It is our responsibility to teach, pass, and correct that mindset. That is 100% true. And again, it did not begin with slavery. Here in America, we want to act like it did, but it didn't. And that is so true. It goes way beyond that. I don't know if Jamie's available, man, but do you want me to send you a link and you can hop in on the conversation? If you do, just let me know, man. I'll go ahead and send you a link so you can jump in on the panel discussion if you're available, Jamie. I'd love to have you if you are. But I feel that's usually where people think it starts, right? That's where it. This is the beginning, and then kind of go from there. The civil rights movement. Also, not all true history is brought forward. I learned even more about Black history when the Black Lives Matter. That you know what, my mother brings up another great point about that, as well as my sister Cindy and my brother Jamie, about the beginnings. And a lot of that, if you think about it, how we were taught in school. A lot of times that's where it starts from. So, any other thoughts?
No, people are absolutely right, and that's I think the default of America tends to be, well, this is where Black history starts at slavery, and then you move forward from there. But I mean, we're going back and we're talking real Black history. Most people's scholar was taught, at the Mecca, in Africa and Egypt and these places. So we're talking Black history. You can go way back and realize that some of the first teachers came from Africa, and they had a lot of darker skin pigmentation. So we can continue. Black history is a very long, rich history. But for some reason here, we default to, okay, people were slaves and they came to Virginia, and the first slaves, were, officially legal in Massachusetts, and we go from there. But there's a long, rich history, and all the comments are right. We've got to learn a way to tell that message and bring it forward.
So you touch on this is a good segue into the next piece, kind of starting to talk about some of the aspects, because we've both mentioned the beginning of slavery is where a lot of people default to start. So I want to ask you this question because you're in Virginia, and Virginia is seen as, like the birthplace of slavery, right? Like the slave trade. What's it like being a Black man celebrating Black History Month in Virginia?
Yeah, something really interesting for me is so we're in a new building now where I work, but outside of my office space, I was on the 7th floor, and there was a Confederate statue that went higher than my floor right outside my window. And I know I didn't think anything of it or whatever. And then I realized as these things move forward, I saw the protest out there. I saw the graffiti on the statue. And we had these conversations about Black History Month. And from my office, I turn around, there's a giant Confederate statue outside of my building that's bigger than half of the building. So it's different. There's a long history in Virginia I mean, Massachusetts and Virginia wasn't the first place to make slavery legal in the United States, but there's 135 statutes that they did to limit, what people of darker pigmentation, Black people, could do. So it was very limited in Virginia. Virginia had a very strong hold on slaves. So it's different in Virginia. You can still feel there's an op-ed here that just came out in the city of Norfolk that said it's still very segregated. So the conversations, while we've moved so much more forward and people's eyes are much more like wider open now, it's not gone. There's still some very disjointed communities, and that's just around America. We still have the Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard on the other side of the train tracks where it's a Black community, other side's a white community. So we're not far, we still got issues that we have to work out.
So I would say in preparation for our conversation, knowing that you were from Virginia, I looked up a couple of things about Virginia, and here's one that I found. So Virginia used to celebrate what's referred to as Lee Jackson King Day. So in case you're wondering, Lee and Jackson, Confederate soldiers, right? So significant Confederacy tie there. Celebrated on the same day as Martin Luther King. This was done from 1984 to the year 2000. Then they decided, hey, we're going to go ahead and separate the two. So we'll still have Martin Luther King Day, but we're going to celebrate Lee Jackson Day on the Friday before Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I believe, is when they celebrate. So here you have Friday. We're going to celebrate these Confederate icons, right? And then we're going to, hey, on Monday, hey, Martin Luther King Day. They didn't abolish the celebration of Lee Jackson Day until 2020, January of 2020. Then they finally said, hey, we need to stop doing this. It's only been a year since they stopped doing that. What are your thoughts about that?
Just I
didn't mean to put you on the spot, but yeah, bro, no. That surprised the hell out of me that they just stopped it last year at 2020.
Yeah, and I think what you're seeing is a lot of the check the box mentality, right? It's just okay, well, we had the Lee Jackson Day and we want to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. So what we'll do is we'll check the box and we'll throw it in there together and let's celebrate them all together. And let's continue to do that. And then maybe when the heat on the stove gets turned up some and they see the tide start to change, because Virginia's progressively come more, progressive, I guess is the word, more of a blue state. So now what we're seeing is, okay, the tide is swaying this way. Maybe it's a good time for us to remove this altogether. And people won't, the truth is, people go where they feel that they can win. And even in Virginia, if the conversation here was more around, we need to keep all these statues, can keep honoring the Confederates, then if the majority of people would do it, I guarantee you Virginia would still have these things up. The tide's turning in Virginia and people are starting to say, hey, this stuff isn't right. It took us till 2020 and 2021 to continue doing this. But unfortunately, that's the same thing. And that's why we have so much work to do, because people don't see the issues with celebrating these two things together. And I think it's a big conversation here about perspective and how people see things, right? You go to the interstate, you look at these conversations people are having, and you see the worst of the worst. And then these people confront each other in public. And what happens is the worst thing we can do is understand the fear that people have of us or one another, not talking about Black people, just in general. If you know what that fear is that someone has, you confront them in person. The worst thing you can do is be the embodiment of that fear. Us having these conversations, us people going back and forth in the comments is what has to happen in order for us to progress, in order for us to understand that you can't celebrate Confederate Leaders Day with Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We have to have these conversations and we can't embody that fear. So how do we have the conversation with those people that say, well, my people fought for this side. It's heritage. We hear that, right? It's heritage thing. My family fought for this side. This is a long history. Instead of getting in people's faces and say, well, this is wrong, you should know better than this, how do we have those conversations to move forward so that each side doesn't come together embodying the worst of each other and making us grow apart instead of grow together? So these conversations that we're having now are important because people have to understand that we're moving forward, we're progressing, and we can't do so by just forcing stuff out. It should have taken until 2020 for us to figure that out. Okay, there's no excuse there. But before then, somebody should have said, we've got to have the conversation. Maybe a governor or someone should have come forward and said, we've got to change this. Start having the conversations in your cities, and let's move forward and do the right thing.
And what's crazy is when you think about Virginia as a whole, you have Remember the Titans, right? So that's an iconic movie, and took place in Virginia, if I'm not mistaken, with Sunshine and all them. And then the idea of the state of Virginia just took a turn. Hopefully, my brother and sister don't mind me just mentioning this. The situation that my nephew went through, right? So he just went through an unpleasant situation, and it just further taints the viewpoint I have towards the state, period. So it just completely changes everything. I think as of right now, you're probably the highlight of Virginia for me. The fact that you live there. Me and
Pharrell.
No, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, it's just, you keep adding these things up, and then you just sit there and go, man, is anybody ever going to take a step back and look at all the things that are just not right? And from a hospitality standpoint, I'm not going to lie. Why the hell would I want to spend my dollars in a state like Virginia if that's what they're going to be doing? Why would I want to do that? And that came to the forefront. I live in St. Augustine. Everybody goes, oh, it's so beautiful. But there is an ugly side here. There's a very ugly side. And that's something that we need to talk about all the time, because if me as a Latino man, I had to bring this up when they were like, well, why does that Confederate monument bother you so much? I'm like, you guys have this big Christmas celebration, the Lights of Lights, and I have to go take my family down to look at these beautiful lights. And in the middle, there's a Confederate monument to remind me that back in the day, I couldn't be married to my wife, for one, because she's white and I would be considered black. And two, I'd be working in the fields. Right. So, all of these things just kind of come together. And the problem is people don't want to hear those pieces. That's the frustrating part. They really don't want to hear those pieces. There are a lot that do, but there's enough that don't, that can create this just constant butting of heads. And it's a huge problem. It is an unbelievable problem. And you would think after all the things we went through over this last year, it would be getting better. And it still has this feeling of, oh, it's getting worse. So, But yeah, it threw me off, man. When I look up just some interesting tidbits of information on Virginia, and I was like, man, it took till 2020. From my understanding, I think Arizona still doesn't completely celebrate Martin Luther King Day.
We're behind.
Right. So it's
we're
like,
way behind. Yeah.
And I may be wrong on that, and they may have changed that, but it's like, what the heck? What do you mean you don't celebrate from that standpoint?
It's not. It's bad. And you mentioned something a minute ago that's now it's getting in the head of Virginians. Now we're talking business. You mentioned that hospitality standpoint. We're talking economic development. We want to bring the Facebooks of the world and the Googles of the world to Virginia. And they're like, look, we don't want to set up beside a bunch of Confederate statues. We don't want to have this. We don't want people hitting on our doors with bricks and knocking stuff down because you guys can't get your act together. So now we're realizing that we're not keeping talent. We're losing talent to the Raleigh, Chapel Hill area, Durham area, North Carolina, to Florida, to these cities that are more progressive. And we're not understanding why. And our crux here is our port and the military. And without it, we'd be really hurting. So we're looking to keep that fresh talent, to keep the universities that we have here, to supply the talent that's being built here, and they're moving somewhere else because we can't catch up with the times. One of our biggest, sellers here is, historic Virginia in Williamsburg. And we're saying, great, that's awesome. We want that to continue. But why are we losing all this talent? The young people aren't here to see cannons roll down the street in Colonial Williamsburg. They want new attractions. They want progressive things for people to do. And Confederate statues just not a good selling point right now.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I want to move to the next talking point that you and I started discussing tied to Black History Month, and it's the monolithic theme. So I actually pulled a dictionary definition of monolithic, and it talks about formed of a single large block of stone, large, powerful, indivisible, and uniform. So that kind of touched on the idea of, hey, all Black people are the same. And you and I were, we've chopped this up a little bit. Why do you think that is still such a sticking point for people to say, "Oh, you're black, you must be fill in the
Yeah.
gap"?
You've got to have Tim's. You got to listen to rap music. You got to vote Democrat. It's just, it's all of these things together, and they've got to understand that Black people are not monolithic. There's so many different cultures, and back then, was it the 1/16 or whatever? Was back with Frederick Douglass, where you got this much Black in you, you're Black. So that expanded to 2021. So if everybody that has this much, Black in them is Black, why are Black people seen as the most monolithic people that there are in the United States? There's so many varying opinions. There's Black people that are Republican. There's Black people that voted for Trump. There's Black people that voted for Biden. There's Black people that voted for Bernie. We're all over the place, and I don't know why it's there, but for some reason it's easier to say. That's when we get into the really tough conversations, right? Like if people would just listen, they wouldn't have these issues with police officers. If people would just follow these rules, and if people didn't look that way, if you weren't doing this, you wouldn't have these issues. And it goes back to the education we're talking about, is we're all not the same. So how we get out of that, it's really up to being able to tell the story. And I think that's where what we're talking about with Black History Month comes in, right? There's these people that did so many things to progress Black people. It's not just slavery. It's so many different things and so many different cultures that make up Black history, that make up American history. So we've got to continue to change that narrative. I don't know. Maybe you have a better answer, but we're definitely seen as monolithic.
Well, I was about to say, I really don't, because, I'm in a state where a lot of people by default, and I've actually had people ask me this recently, which made me step back, but I've had people say, "Oh, you speak Mexican. Can you help me out with this person?" And I've literally like just to let you know, Mexicans speak Spanish. I'm Puerto Rican. We speak Spanish too. But if you speak Spanish, that doesn't mean you're Mexican, right? So there's that aspect there. I think with monolithic, that it almost expands to anybody of color. The Asians go through it, right? So all of a sudden, by default, all Asians are Chinese, right? And there's so many different types. With Latinos, by default, we're all Mexican. When you look at Black, they may not say, "Oh, they're all one way or the other," but it's Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican, but they lump us all. They go, "Oh, you're Black, so you must be this way." And it's funny you mentioned the Tims and kind of the rap music and all that, because here I am at Flagler College, and I am the faculty advisor for the Black Student Union, and I've had some of the Black students who have actually made comments like that. They've actually, when they've spoken, they said, "Hey, I'm not like all the other Black kids," and I'm like, well, what does that mean? What is a Black kid like? Right. So when I say, I'm like, what is a Black kid like? What do you mean? They go, "Well, and I go, "No, I don't." And at times it's the equivalent, I feel, of if a Latino doesn't speak Spanish, with some of these Black kids, like if they don't listen to rap music, they feel in some way, shape, or form they're not as Black as everybody else. And it falls under that monolithic kind of umbrella there. And at times I feel Black History Month, I don't want to say further kind of lumps people into it, but if you only watch certain parts of Black History Month or participate in certain aspects that you think you should, you further solidify that thought in your mind that all Black people are the same.
And you're exactly right. And that's something that minority groups have to do better internally. We can't allow the story that's been told define who we are as a people. The Hispanic community, the Black community, the Asian community, any community like that, if you continue to make people feel bad for thinking a different way, there was a big thing right now with Pharrell. He had an interview where he said, "If you're doing illegal stuff around me, I'm quote unquote, for those who don't know, I'm snitching. Everybody doesn't know. I'm telling on you. I'm telling law enforcement. Don't do it around me." And he was instantly hit with a lot of negative feedback from the Black community for saying, "Hey, that's not what we do. That's not who we are as a people." We don't talk to police officers. We don't snitch. So we got to get that monolithic thinking out of our own heads as well. Because if we do it, what keeps people that are not in the minority communities from doing it as well?
Yeah. So, and there are a lot of points that have been coming up. My brother mentioned, earlier talking about when you were talking about reparations and giving it back. I think the perception there, again, monolithic, and Dave Chappelle kind of played on this, that if you give Black people money, they're not going to know what to do with the money.
Yeah.
Right. They're just going to spend it on all kind of frivolous stuff. And I guess us being people of color and being around other individuals of color that are educated, good with money, to do all the things to try and be successful. This is such a foreign idea that, hey, if you give a Black person money, they're just going to spend it and blow it and do all kinds of crazy stuff, especially when I think of my brother Jamie and how he's built his own little baby empire with my sister, right? So diversifying his portfolio, looking at different streams of income, being financially literate, educating his kids on financial literacy, home ownership, multiple home ownership, all these things that are typically associated with white behavior. That's a complete deviation from the idea of being monolithic. But when somebody sees him, they're going to be like, there's just another Black dude that if you give him some money, he's going to, right? So, it's crazy that, and the reason I bring it up is to further solidify what you were saying. I don't know how we can continue to break it unless we just continue to have these conversations.
You're absolutely right. That's a good point for you. You assume that just Black people would know what to do with it. I would say numbers show us that any group of people, no matter what the color, that are impoverished wouldn't know what to do with a whole lot of money. That just doesn't apply to skin complexion. That applies with what economic, financial stability you have in your life. And numbers show us that the Black community, as the numbers wise, sits in a lower tier, and we got to come out of that tier. And talking impoverished white people, impoverished Hispanic people, impoverished Black people, if thrown a huge sum of money, who knows what they would do with it? We know that the education system, unfortunately, has failed a lot of those communities that are impoverished. So if we're just talking numbers and data, it's not, we don't have the tools as an impoverished community to have the knowledge to move forward. There absolutely are people that would say, hey, I'm going to get a whole bunch of money no matter what color, and I'm going to go invest. I'm going to go buy land. I'm going to get an attorney and a financial person, and we're going to go and make money. But 9 times out of 10, numbers don't lie. And when people get these things, when people hit the lotto, 9 out of 10 go broke. Yeah. So that's just also, it's also thinking monolithic, but it's also thinking, these are numbers. This is what happens with data. This is what we're saying. And unfortunately, it's not a pretty picture.
Because I think about, what would I do if, like when it was up to $1 billion, but the conversations that we had, we were like, man, what would we do with all that money? Of course, we were like, hey, the first thing we pay off all of our debt, right? So houses, cars, we pay that off. And then we started talking about, hey, let's go ahead and set up the future. So, hey, let's go ahead and set up trust funds for the kids. And then I started saying, I have nieces and nephews. Let's go ahead and get them set up. Let's make sure our parents are taken care of. So then trying to create this sustainable wealth that I feel a lot of times is not considered just a conversation that they associated with the Black community. So, that I don't know what the solution is, but I think the more we continue to move forward and educate each other, I think it's really going to help from that standpoint. I want to move on to the next little piece of conversation, and it is revolving around symbolism, right? So the idea of symbolism. So looking at statues, athletes. First thing I want to talk to you about is, there has been talk about Harriet Tubman showing up on the $20 bill. I actually think that would be awesome, right? Along with a lot of other things. So what are your thoughts on the aspect of symbolism tied to Black History Month and kind of moving things forward from that perspective?
Yeah, symbolism ties into what we're just talking about, even with reparations, right? Because we're older now, our brains mature, our thought process matured. But now we're talking about, a younger generation and these symbols. And we're talking about, say, we're giving a younger generation a whole bunch of money, and all the symbolism we see, especially the minority community, are actors or our sports athletes or whatever. We don't focus on the scholars or anything. We focus on the people that we see on TV and what are they doing? They're living in mansions. They're driving big cars. So if you're 17 or whatever you are, 18, you get a whole bunch of money. Our symbols, our heroes are the people that we see on the basketball courts that are doing all of these things. So it's what we want to emulate because it's what we see. We're not talking about people like Frederick Douglass that did all the writing and did all the progression as far as scholarships and stuff to the community. So what we're talking about now is just I think it helps. Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill helps moving forward, especially with the younger generation, because now you see these symbols. Now you see these people of importance. Now you see these people that were left off of the statues that are saying, hey, you could ask the question, there's a giant statue there. Why is the statue there? Well, this person did this. Hey, mom, hey, dad, why is this person on the $20 bill? There he is.
Yeah, that's my brother
because
Jimmy.
of symbols, right?
Hey, guys.
Thanks for being here, Jimmy. Good. I'm glad you're here. So I'm going to keep going down reading the question because you got some good ones.
Absolutely.
So Jamie, we were just touching in on the symbolism. Yeah.
So if you can fill me in a little bit, maybe on your question.
So we were just talking about the idea of symbolism, what it means to you. How do you think it could be better portrayed? Because we were just having the monolithic conversation.
Yep.
So, how important do you think symbolism is with regard to the essence of Black History Month?
Yeah, listen, so symbolism is uber important. And I think for Black people especially, because it goes back to, some of the comments that I was making, that for centuries, we were not portrayed in a positive light. Even today, when we talk about, when we think about, how we're portrayed in movies, how we're portrayed on the TV screens, symbolism is wildly important for us. So, again, I think the conversation is surrounding, Harriet Tubman being on the $20 bill. How important would that be for Black people, for young Black girls to be able to see one of the heroes that we know about in our community, that we speak about, around this country? She's so important, that she's placed on the $20 bill. And not only the symbolism of her being on the $20 bill, but the symbolism of, I think it's Andrew Jackson being taken off of the $20 bill.
Yeah.
What does that symbolism mean for this country as we're talking about moving forward in a different, more positive direction?
I tell you what, I would be so excited to see Harriet Tubman on a $20 bill. I mean, because for me, it would symbolize so many things. But still, for me, what it would most symbolize is the work is finally starting to chip away. I don't want people to take it as here's a check mark, but this is the beginning of a true paradigm shift, that all this work has finally started to chip away. And then I think about all the other aspects as far as symbolism, and I'll give you this one. So my boys go to St. Augustine High School. They had to play a school in Jacksonville, the Robert E. Lee Generals, which is in a majority Black neighborhood. And when we showed up, some of the people around me were surprised that I said, yo, this is crazy. How the hell are they going to have this school named Robert E. Lee? And the majority of what drives this school is the Black community. Don't they see the irony in this, right? And then there were some Black individuals who said, hey, I went to that school. I'm proud to be part of that school. And I get it. You want to support your school. But to me, still, the celebration of a Confederate icon, it just didn't line up. It didn't line up for me. I would see it almost as the equivalent of being super excited as somebody who's Puerto Rican going, I went to Christopher Columbus High School. Right? He basically tried to extinct the Puerto Rican people. So there's no way I could be excited and happy about it. So
Dave, if I can interject,
it's
go ahead. Also that's a great example, because it's also upsetting because you think about the reason or the time frame that they placed the name of this high school in the Black community. Symbols mean something. When we think about all these Confederate symbols that were erected during actually prior to Jim Crow during the 20s, or during Jim Crow during the 20s, they were erected a lot of times to show Black people, this is your place. Stay in your place. Yes, you're gonna walk past this Confederate general, this Confederate symbol, who did not think that you were equal to a man, you know? So the symbols mean something. You know, I was reading, there's a book on the courthouse lawn, I believe it is.
Hmm.
Incredible
Yeah.
book, but it talked about how they would put these Confederate symbols on the courthouse lawn to show Black people that, yes, you may go to court, you may do these things, but here you aren't equal. You're not going to get a fair shake. You're not going to be treated equally. You know, so absolutely, symbols are important. And to your point, or to the point, turning those symbols around for something positive, showing the community that these symbols were once erected to scare, to intimidate. We're now going to put some symbols there to uplift. That's very, very, is wildly important.
Thank you so much. That's a great point. Ronnie, you were going to say something else? I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. I'm agreeing in totality. I would say that Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill affords us an opportunity, the younger generation especially, to ask questions, right? Because if we're always seeing the Andrew Jackson, everything, where kids can ask questions. What did this person do? What's his important piece of history? And they can get an answer. How can we ask questions about what Black people did if there's nothing there as a symbol to know of? So if we don't have any symbols to recognize, we can't even educate ourselves or Americans in general. So having Harriet Tubman there on the $20 bill will allow us to allow that kid to say, who is this person? What did she do? And allow us to re-educate ourselves to understand that there's a place for us in the society. There's a place that shows that we help build America as well. So I think it's highly important.
Well, and so if I could add on to that point,
Mm-hmm.
also what it does is I don't know if it's intrigue. I don't know the word that I'm looking for, but it causes America to look deeper into the Black culture, into Black history, and say, who else is worthy of being on a bill? Who else is worthy of having a statue be erected in their honor? You know, when you don't have those symbols, when you don't have a lot of those symbols, you know, you wonder, what did these people do without thinking? You know, your educated person is going to think and read and find out, but you have a lot of uneducated people out there that say, well, what did these people truly do if they're not on bills, if they're not on statues, if they don't have monuments erected in their honor? And the reality is we didn't write the history books. You know, had we wrote the history books, we'd be all over the place. We didn't write the history book. So this is a way of starting to reclaim our history and tell our story, tell us a story that is, like Ronnie said, part of the American story. It's part of the fabric of this country.
Yeah, and I would actually throw this out, and I'm going to throw it out into the universe. Another person I'd love to see on some kind of monetary denomination is Barack Obama, right? So the reason I say that is we recognize George Washington as the first president of the United States, and he was elected, and he's put on money. Barack Obama was the first elected Black president in this country. Something that I honestly thought I would never see. I never thought I would see. Another thing that I never thought I would see, and it's changed my mind, is a woman president. And the reason I say that is because I feel America just never would totally be ready for a woman president. And I'm going to be honest, Kamala Harris has changed my thought on that from that perspective. So if we're going to go and look at recognizing significant moments with these individuals, at some point for me, Barack Obama's got to be on money. He's got to be, and not like a crazy domination that's hardly ever touched, but one that's like touched by everybody almost every day. It's got to be in that aspect because of what he represented. For the first time ever, I felt every little boy and girl of color at least said, I have a chance. I have a chance. And now with Kamala Harris, I feel there's even more a little bit legitimate of a young boy or a young girl of color to say, I really have a chance. And I think we need to, like you guys have said, recognize those moments in symbolism, because the more you see them, that's another good one. I'm going to throw this one up there because I agree. Stacey Abrams, right? All of these individuals need to be recognized in ways that they haven't. They need to be immortalized in history books. And it needs to be more common where it's not just celebrated over these 28 and 29 days, but over 365 days throughout the year, because they did such extraordinary things for all Americans. But like you said earlier, Jamie, is so significant for the Black community to recognize this, because they're just trendsetters. They're trendsetters for the future. So I want to move into the last little conversation piece for both of you. And Jamie, you don't know how happy I am that you joined us. I am.
Thanks for having
It's always it's always a pleasure to see you. You always, I tell you what, man, you always make me smile. I love you so much. Thank you for jumping in.
Love the show.
But for both of you, I want to get your thoughts. Do you think Black History Month is still considered a good thing?
Ronnie, I'll let
Are you
take
talking?
it.
Yeah, no problem. I say, are we talking personal? Or are we talking what do we think America as a whole sees it as?
We could take it from both aspects. You could take it from you personally, how you think about it, and you could take it if you think it's good for America as a whole.
Yeah, I think personally, we're not there, right? We're still not there where we can say it's time for Black History Month to go. There's a lot that we have to make up, and there's a lot we have to learn. There's people and heroes that are throughout history that people don't even know their names. And because America as a whole still has this, Black people are still here. And if we didn't think that way, and I'm saying now I'm talking as a whole, we wouldn't see all the incidents that we see in public, all the incidents we see with law enforcement. So we're not there yet where we can say, hey, let's get rid of Black History Month. The end recipe for me is Black History Month has to be a normal set throughout the year, because you couldn't be America without all the accolades coming from Black history. So at some point, it's got to be 365. But right now, until we get to that point, I think we have to continue to push Black History Month, and until as a nation we can say, yeah, because as a nation as a whole, we don't agree that we have race issues in the nation right now.
Yeah.
And if we can't agree to that, if we can't agree that we shouldn't be honoring Confederate, soldiers, then we've got a lot of work to do. So for now, Black history needs to stay. But in the end, I hope at some point it can go away and we can make it American history as a whole.
So, listen, I do believe that Black History Month is here to stay. It should be. Yes, I do believe that. And I feel as Ronnie does, that at some point, we want to be able to honor the Black community, the Black experience, the Black history as a whole, and our impact on this country 365 days out of the year. But I'm a realist, and I realize that living in this country, that's not going to happen anytime. It won't happen in my lifetime. So until we see an equitable amount of Black CEOs in corporate America, until we see an equitable amount of Black owners of athletic teams, we still have some educating of America to do. We have to continue to educate America that we are just as good as anyone else. And so we will utilize always Black History Month to shine a light on what we've done and why this country could not exist without us. But we also will utilize Black History Month to show this is who we are as a people. This is what we're continuing to do. We aren't a monolithic people. We are a diverse group of people who are incredible in the arts, who are incredible in the sciences, who are incredible, athletes, who are incredible, you name it. So yeah, Black History Month is not going away. There's no reason it should, because America as it stands still needs to understand that we have so much more to offer. And not only do we have much more to offer, we've always had more to offer. America's got to loosen its grips and give us the opportunity to show these things, to lead, to lead organizations, things of that nature. So I definitely believe that Black History Month is vital. It's vital. It is vital.
What you just said, Jamie, reminds me of a comment that I've heard so many people say: everybody's for equality till it's time to give up their share.
That's
right.
Exactly
so
right.
that's kind of
exactly right.
The situation that we're looking at here. Ronnie, you were going to say something else?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ronnie.
No. My only thing I was going to say is that we've got to find a way to change the narrative that Black history should only be celebrated by Black people. Black history has accomplishments for America. You don't have to have a dark skin pigmentation to celebrate Black history. So as Americans, we should be proud of the accomplishments in the Black community that helped push us forward. So until we celebrate Black History Month like we celebrate July 4th, there's still a lot of learning to do.
Well, and so if I could add on to that is a great point. you think about you think about slavery and the abolishment of slavery. That wouldn't have happened unless we were able to lock arm in arm with white people. You think about, fast forward present day, you think about George Floyd and the reckoning that this country, had to face with George Floyd's murder. That reckoning didn't take place with Black people just being upset. It was, every single racial group that makes up this country locking arm in arm. So without question, Black History Month is important for Black people to continue to share and tell their story, but it's uber important that as a country, every single racial group that makes up this country embraces our culture and embraces the impact that we've had on this country. Absolutely.
Well, and I want to jump, my dad threw this one out there, NFL case in point, with so many NFL guys just getting passed over because they're Black. Like the conversation they're having now with the offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs. What is it? Bieniemy. To me, that's a no-brainer, right? He should be an NFL head coach somewhere. And there's still a lot of conversation of, is he ready to be a head coach somewhere? And that's a perfect example. A couple other comments coming in. I actually want to give a shout out to my sister on this, because she brought up a good point, and both of you reiterated it, that we need to recognize and honor the 365 of Black history. There's so many contributions that allowed to go forward. And I like what she said is, let's celebrate it throughout the year, but let's continue to put that bright, shining spot on it that one time a year. I'm actually, I look at this as always kind of that refresher, being educated, but I always feel I learned something new that I didn't know before. And here's something that we're going to look back many years from now. Shonda Rhimes, right? Shonda Rhimes, who's done How to Get Away with Murder, Grey's Anatomy. Now she's got Bridgerton, which is one of the most successful shows on Netflix. We're going to be talking about this joint 10 years from now.
Absolutely.
And how successful that show is. And here's the crazy thing. A lot of people still don't know like who she is.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the crazy part of all this. So Joe put this up, Black History Month from his perspective forces, or should force himself, white peers, to put their privilege in check. Thank you so much for saying that, Joel. I really do appreciate that. This was a former student at East Carolina. Totally appreciate your words and you always turning in. And even an individual who's not white, myself, it puts me in check to recognize, hey, there are more hardships that existed than maybe I realized. And I need to understand that history to help educate not just myself, but my kids, their friends, right? If they have friends coming, their friends' parents, and those that we surround ourselves with on a daily basis. So I appreciate your guys' words on all that. As we get ready to kind of wrap this up, I want to get your guys' final thoughts on Black History Month or anything else kind of related to the conversation we've had. Jamie, I hope you don't mind. I'll start with you because I really would like to end with Ronnie, since he was my original panelist guest, and you just gave us the little extra icing on the cake by joining in. I appreciate you, brother. Final thoughts on tonight, man. What do you got for us?
Oh man, this has been a great dialogue, great discussion. I go back to the fact that what I said before. Black History Month is vitally important, not only for this country, but for the Black community. I think, and kind of to Joe made a point. I think it was Joe about white privilege and things of that nature. I think that when you look at it from that perspective, you put yourself in the shoes of an African American. One of the things that I get excited about for Black History Month is the fact that my TV screen, whether it's TV shows or commercials or, billboards or magazines, are going to be flooded with images of positive Blackness. Because after February or before February, that's not always the case. My wife and I go to the store and prime example. Today, my wife texted me and said, we've got to get this incredible Black Barbie doll for Elin. That shouldn't be a huge point of emphasis. We should be able to go to the store and find an array of Black Barbie dolls for our Black and Hispanic daughter, to be able to see something positive and an image that looks like her. But that's not always the case. And it's so much not the case that it was highlighted in her text. Like, we've got to get this because, you know, it's hard to find this. And so again, you know, 11 months out of the year, we don't have all of these positive Black images that reinforce how smart we are, you know, how strong we are, how whatever it is that we are. And so I just think that Black History Month is vitally important for us because it's that 1 month out of the year where we can turn on the TV, we can open up the newspaper, we can flip around, you know, flip the pages of a magazine and see these images that really promote us in a positive light, which is incredibly important for our youth and for our kids as they try to figure out from a self-esteem standpoint, from a where do I fit in this society standpoint, how do people view me standpoint. We need at least 1 month for them to walk away from it and say, you know what? Yeah, this is positive. I'm proud to be Black. Because outside of this month, you might get the wrong idea. You might get the wrong idea depending upon what TV station you turn on, you know. So
thank you so much for those words, Jamie. I appreciate it. Ronnie, what you got for us?
No, man. First, thank you so much. You know, I love these conversations. Jamie, thank you so much for making me think outside the box. Much appreciated. For me, you know, Black History Month is what I like to call a lens check. It's an opportunity for you to put on the lens of someone that you'd never be able to put the lens on and see the world through their perspective. Step out of what you see on TV every day and realize that people are not just sports players. People are not just wearing Timbs. People are not just listening to rap music. People are creating COVID-19 vaccines. A Black female helped do that. People are scholars. People are teaching your kids to grow up and own businesses and companies. So Black History Month not only helps uplift Black people, it helps you that might not be Black understand the value of Black people as well. So you don't just have that trigger moment when you run into a Black person and you can release some of that fear that you might have. It allows us also, just to, as mentioned here, to set the tone for future generations, to understand that though 11 other months out of the year, you might not see yourself creating all these great things, that this stuff did happen. There are people that came and set the precedent for America. I really want to hone in on that. Lose the whole Black History Month is for a certain skin complexion. It is American history. It should be honored as American history. It's a process that moved us forward in celebration of people that just happen to have a darker skin complexion. So understand, acknowledge it as American history, as a moment for us to all cherish and all honor, and keep moving forward and allow yourself to be open-minded.
I tell you what, thank you both gentlemen so much for your words. I don't even have anything to add. You guys just wrapped that up perfectly with a nice little bow on it. I truly appreciate it. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about next week. Hopefully you guys can join us. Next week, I have an amazing guest. I'm really excited because this individual is not really tied into my circle of individuals. Her name is Fatima Owens. She is an author. She wrote a book called The Prescription is in the Dirt. Talks about her trials and tribulations growing up, dealing with abuse. This is going to be one that I think a lot of people are going to want to tune in as far as how to go from nothing into something amazing. I found her profile just online, reached out, and she said, "Oh, I would love to be on the show." I'm really excited to talk to her. I think this is going to be a good thing that a lot of people may need to hear at this time of year, because we are in 2021, but there's still a lot of people dealing with some mental health issues and things like that. And this may be the perfect individual to hear to kind of get you through some of these difficult times that you're dealing with. So again, Fatima Owens next week, the author of the book, The Prescription is in the Dirt. You can find it on Amazon. You might want to check that out. Gentlemen, again, thank you so much for joining me. Jamie, thank you for the late tune-in. I appreciate it. Just the last couple of things: pushed education throughout my family. Education person is a competitive in all aspects of life. That is true. And my mom, love you guys. Thanks for the great session. Love you too, Mom. Thank you so much. I hope everybody has a good night and look forward to seeing you all next week.